What is happening, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Around the NSL. And man, this week's NSL table has been like the weather in the East Coast. It's changed drastically from the last week, and maybe a little bit gloomy too, especially if you're at the top of the table, because Montreal Roses finally got beaten by the Wild. Vancouver Rice sank to their depths against the Rapid. And meanwhile, Toronto did find their groove against Halifax Tide. So with so many changes, we got lots to unpack. So let's get into it. All right, so let's start with the game that made the most impact on the table, which was Ottawa Rapid versus the Vancouver Rice at TD Place in Ottawa. And man, that was a takedown because Rapid absolutely take down the Rise 3-0 on Thursday. And it was a statement win for the Ottawa Rapid. It takes them from the 4th place to the 2nd place. But even more importantly, Vancouver Rise dropped from the 2nd place all the way to the 5th. I mean, that's a drastic drop. And it's even more drastic considering the context. Because Vancouver were coming in with a 1-1 draw against Toronto. A very, very well-fought draw. They had a lot of control in the midfield, especially with Quinn and Nikki Stanton doing a great job. They've been very solid overall through the middle and in the defense. Their biggest challenge has been forward line and not enough finishing. I mean, a good stat for that is their highest scorer is Quinn, and both of the goals they scored were penalties, right? So that's not good enough. Whereas on the Rapid side, Ottawa were also coming in with a draw against the Wild. But I have to say, Ottawa have been the most improved team in the NSL in the last 5 weeks. Period. Easily. I mean, they've found some amazing talent all across the pitch. In their defense, you have Jalissa Harris, Suzanne Holland, who's been very good. They have some amazing left and right backs on the flanks. Chu especially. They have some amazing wing plays. Stella Downing has been a revelation. She is a promising young talent. Their forward players are great. You know, DB Pridham is the top scorer right now in the league. Minna Lee is an amazing playmaker. Even their defensive mid, Desi Scott and Ellen Gibson, are super, super experienced, but that is also their main weakness. Desi Scott and Gibson have been too conservative, and that has led to a lot of instances where they let the other team dictate the pace to them, and that also means that they don't have good connectivity between the midfield and the forward lines. A good example of that is, last game they had 17 shots, but only 4 on target, and that happens when your midfield is not able to support your forward line effectively enough, and there's a gap between the two. And that would mean either your flank players are trying to dribble in and maybe shoot from tight angles, or your forward players are not getting good XG shots on target. And that was the concern Rapid had. But with all that context, I was intrigued to see what kind of changes both teams would make. The first change Ottawa made was and only change actually, was Melanie Forbes came in for Suzanne Holland. Now, on paper, that looks like just one change, but what ended up happening was it made a big change in the right side of the Ottawa defense, because Suzanne Holland is a center back, and she was sitting out because of an injury. But because instead of making a like-to-like change in that center back position, they brought in Liv Scott from the right back position into the center back. Adamek, who's right wing, was dropping down into right back, and Melanie Forbes came into that right wing position. So it kind of changed the whole right side of that Ottawa midfield and defense. On the other side, Vancouver made 4 changes, and this really, this had the most impact on the result. Now, on the broadcast, they said this was because of rotation, because Vancouver is playing 2 short weeks in a row. By that, I mean they played last Sunday and Thursday, and now this week they're playing Wednesday and Saturday, so 2 games in 3 days for 2 weeks in a row. Probably that's the reason, but who knows? Sophia Hagman came in for Quinn, who we all know is their playmaker. And Josie Longhurst came in for Nikki Stanton, who's also a very key player in defensive mid. DiFilippo comes in for Holly Ward in the forward line, and Lisa Peczerski came in for Sienna Gibson in the forward line again. Now, DiFilippo and Peczerski, maybe not so much as critical, but Sophia Hagman and Longhurst were the more important changes, which we will talk in a second, made the biggest difference. Now, the first half, Vancouver kind of started in a very similar manner that they've done in the past, which is 4-3-3, with two of the midfielders kind of going up a little bit in possession and playing a single pivot. And in this case, Sophia Hagman was playing that single pivot in place of Quinn, who usually is their playmaker. Now, Samantha Chang and Josie Longhurst are the two midfielders who step up and help the forward three. The problem is, when those two midfielders can't retreat on time, you're outnumbered, especially if on the other side, in this case, Ottawa, is playing almost a 3-5-2 or 3-4-3, which is there's a lot of numbers in your own half when your players are trying to push up. Now, so if you are caught in transition, you are in trouble. So Ottawa were really outnumbering Vancouver in the midfield with 5 in the midfield. And Hagman, who was a single pivot, almost outnumbered sometimes with 2 or 3 players around her, and she didn't have good outlet passes. She was not able to connect with Longhurst and Samantha Chang effectively enough. Now, a good example of this is the first goal. Now, Sophia Hagman has the ball for Vancouver. She looks up, doesn't find anyone around her because she's outnumbered, tries to put a long ball up. And what that does, when you play a long ball, you have a lot of your own teammates much further forward. And if you lose that long ball at the end of it, and the other team gets it, you might be in trouble. And that's what happens. Chu from Ottawa gets that ball at the end of that long ball. And she drives through the midfield, finds Ellen Gibson, who I have to call out. Ellen Gibson has been so much more improved from last week in how aggressive she's been. She wasn't conservative at all. She was willing to step into that attacking mid position, push up, and give Ottawa more options. And that's what happens here. Chu finds Gibson way high up. She gets the ball, Gibson, and then she looks up, finds Melanie Forbes, who has a lot of space on the wings because of Hagman's error. The left back and the right back of Vancouver Rice are way high up, and so there's a lot of space in the wings as well, and it gives Melanie Forbes a lot of space to run towards the touchline, and so she does. And obviously, as always, DB Pridham, who is making a great run to the middle towards the goal, and Melanie Forbes puts a cross in from the touchline, finds Pridham, taps it in, 1-0, and right away, Ottawa are up. And that's really what the story was for the first half from there on. I mean, most of the half, Rapid has this compressed midfield with Forbes and Downing also tucking in and making it really hard for the single pivot of Hagman to find a good pass, and this really outnumbers the midfield. Now, in the second half, Vancouver does make a change, but it's very intriguing to me because they pull out Sophia Hagman, which I don't think was necessary, even though she was struggling, but it wasn't because of her own fault. It was just that she was getting outnumbered. But she does get replaced, and they bring in Ellen Wong. Now, I have to call out Ellen Wong is a very, very young talent. She is on a development contract, and so it was very surprising to see that they put someone that young into such an important role in that defensive mid single pivot role, and so I was worried for her. Now, before we get to what happens, the only other change that they made was Holly Ward comes in for DiFilippo in the forward line, but that really doesn't amount to much. So the problem I had with Ellen Wong coming in was, as I said, she was very inexperienced, and you don't want someone that inexperienced to be put into that situation where you have to really control so much of the game in such high pressure. And that's what leads to the goal, really. Right away, she gets exposed because, first of all, Vancouver is incredibly hesitant to press because they're playing 4-3-3, so they have three up top, so they need to press without much hesitation when Ottawa has the ball. Now Ottawa has the ball, they don't press, they're very hesitant. So what Ottawa does is, okay, we're going to play around the flanks, we're going to take our time, and because they have a 3-4-3, as I mentioned earlier, which is they can send their left and right backs up, and their defensive midfielders can drop. Desi Scott can drop into the defense and really dictate the play on the flanks. So that's what happened. Desi Scott dropped down, played a pass around the midfield of Vancouver to the right flank where Kayla Adamek was, and Adamek was able to connect with Min Ali and let her take the ball up the field. And with just two passes between Desi Scott and Adamek to Min Ali, they beat the whole Vancouver midfield, the three in the midfield. You had Samantha Chang, Josie Longhurst, and Ellen Wong. All three were beat, just two passes, and it's Minna Lee who has the ball in the attacking third all of a sudden with the whole pitch ahead of her, with no one marking her, no one even around her. It really had to do with Wong completely missing Minna Lee, and she's being out of position. Sadly enough, I mean, that's what happens when you put in an inexperienced player into that kind of a situation. And Minna Lee has all the time to look up, play a really good-looking through ball. To her credit, she plays a very good through ball through the defense, finds Pridham. Pridham is as reliable as ever, slots into the left corner, and that's 2-0. It's as easy as that for Ottawa. I mean, Vancouver really gets exposed in their hesitancy to press. When they're playing 4-3-3, you have to press hard, and their inexperience in the midfield. That's what kept happening for the rest of the half. In the midfield, Ellen Wong was woefully out of position in attack. Mariah Lee was out of position in terms of pressing. And pretty soon enough, Mariah Lee got substituted. Ularbi comes in for Chang. And on the other side, Banati comes in for Stella Downing. Julia Banati comes in for Stella Downing. Now, on one hand, where Stella Downing, who as I said earlier is an amazing talent, has a lot of pace, has a lot of energy, can win tackles, can really drive towards the goal from the flanks, she doesn't have a finishing product. Banati, on the other hand, is a very experienced head. She might not be as quick or as fast, but she knows exactly where to be. And that's what happens on the third goal. The same mistakes happen with Vancouver. It's the exact same mistakes. Ball watching by Ellen Wong, and in this case as well, Anais Ularbi, who also came in. So what happens is Ottawa has the ball in defense, and they are trying to work the ball up. In this case, Min Ali drops deep and tries to interplay with Desi Scott and Chu on the left flank. What this does is it pulls Anais Ularbi and Ellen Wong out of position. They are both attracted to the ball. They're ball watching. They come along with Min Ali, and it leaves a lot of space open behind them. I would say more Ellen Wong's fault than Ularbi, but there's a lot of space in that defensive midfield of Vancouver all of a sudden. Julia Banati is too experienced not to exploit the space, so she steps into that space. This pulls out Jalen Wright, who's the right back for Vancouver. She has to track Banati going into that defensive mid hole that's been created. And when the right back, gets pulled out, that opens up a lot of space on the wing, and Desi Scott is there to fill that. That's pretty much what happens. So, Banati gets the ball as she fills that space from defense. She gets the ball from defense. She takes one touch and releases Desi Scott on the wing because she knows there's space behind her, because she knows the right back has tracked with her. So she just takes one touch, releases Desi Scott behind her. Scott gets the ball, drives up, and Banati also doesn't stop. She keeps running and runs towards the goal. Desi Scott takes one touch on from the outside of her foot, passes to Banati, who's making a run on the goal, and Banati, with her one touch outside of the foot, just places it into the top of the net. Really good finish, I have to say. Very, very good finish. But that was just a lot of experience playing against a lot of inexperience. Banati showing her experience in finding the hole in that defensive midfield, filling it up. Scott also doing the same, but on the other side, Ellen Wong showing her inexperience by getting drawn through ball watching rather than holding her position and not, leaving that space behind her. And that really was the story of the game, which is Ottawa's positional flexibility, players being able to maneuver different structure. I mean, Chu playing on left back, Chu playing in inverted midfield, Stella Downing sometimes playing on the flank, sometimes tucking in. You had Adamek, who was playing right back. She would go up and play inverted midfield sometimes. DB Pridham, who was dropping back, and she would also play number 9. Banati playing some really good 1-2 plays with Desi Scott in defensive midfield, but at the same time going up. So there were so many places where Ottawa was showing their superior experience, whereas Vancouver's midfield was woefully inexperienced. And I worry for their depth in this case because once you have Quinn and Stanton not playing for any reason, they don't have anything behind them to fill in that midfield. I mean, Hagman is fine, but like if after Hagman it's just Ellen Wong, I'd be worried. Same thing I would say also with their depth in the forward line. I mean, Mariah Lee, I don't know how happy the coach might be with her. She's not created many chances. She's a center forward, and she's barely had many touches in the 18-yard box. Same is true with Nydia Savan, Lisa Pechersky, Sienna Gibson. All of these players have been tried in that attacking third, in that forward line. Hasn't worked. So I'm a little worried for Vancouver with their ability to A, cover for Quinn and Stanton, and B, create many chances. That problem hasn't gone away. It's been haunting them for the last almost 5 weeks now because they haven't scored any goals. Like, it has been Quinn that's been doing all the scoring for them through set pieces. So they need to figure that out. Ottawa, on the other hand, has found their rhythm and may even be in a much, much better shape without their center back, oddly enough. So we'll see what they can do next game. Big shout out to Pridham. Big shout out to Ellen Gibson. Very impressed. So I'm excited for them. Well-deserved second place. And let's see where they can grow from here. All right, so let's talk about the second game of the week, which I think was the most intriguing game of the week because even though these two teams were at the bottom of the table, these two teams were also the most improved teams over the last week, I would say. And obviously I'm talking about Halifax Tides facing off AFC Toronto at the Wanderers grounds in Halifax. Now, the reason I say I was intrigued so much was because of the context. Now, Toronto were coming in with a 1-1 draw against Vancouver. And even before that, they had a pretty good win as well. So they were on a roll. Good on counters, good on the wings, pretty good on direct balls. They were finally clicking in offense. Their biggest challenge was figuring out a good position for Nikayla Small, who, by the way, I would say is the most important player for Toronto, period. Even more than Victoria Pickett or Emma Regan. I said it. I mean, it's true. She is very critical to their success. And we'll get into more of that later. On the other side, Halifax were also coming in with a 0-0 draw, but not just any draw. They had held Montreal to a draw. That's a huge thing because Montreal were 3-0. They were top of the table, and for Halifax to come out with a draw and from that game was a statement. And they did it with some amazing tactical changes, starving the Montreal midfield with some amazing marking, and overall just absolute good work from their midfield and forwards. So with all of that context, I was very intrigued to see how these two teams would, go on and improve in the way they play. So first of all, the changes that they made was interesting, which was Halifax brought in Millie Clegg for her first start. She had come in last game off the bench, first appearance after a long injury, so she was going to start, which I think was the right thing to do. Nakamura also started, and for the first time in their 5 games, they went in with a 4-4-2. So Clegg and Nakamura were their two up top, which we'll get to and see how that made a difference. Meanwhile, for Toronto once again changed their defense. I don't know why. I mean, they need to stop tinkering so much in their back three. But anyways, Heiji sits out, Kayla Hansen sits out, and Sarah Rollins gets her first start in center back, and Croy Soto comes back in at right back. So overall, there were some changes, but the bigger changes, I think, were from Halifax's side. So first half, Toronto played the same old 3-5-2. They played three at the back. Everyone knows that now. And for attack, they spread that midfield with a 5 midfield wide, stretch it out on the flanks. Nicola Small on the right-hand side, Colby Barnett on the left-hand side, with Pickett or Ashuri joining the top two whenever needed, especially in attack. Now, this actually worked in their favor this time because for some reason Halifax, I don't think they needed to do this, but they went with a 4-4-2. They had Clegg and Nakamura already up, but when they had an attack, they would send Marika Guay and Sarah Miller up as well. So instead of a 4-4-2 in attack, they were actually playing 4-2-4. They were committing numbers forward, especially given the fact that Toronto already has a crowded midfield. This was going to backfire on Halifax, and it did a lot of times. Now, the crux of it was Halifax Tides had that two up top. They would push the back three of Toronto back, right? So when you have two up top and the opposition has three in the back, the three in the back have too much to handle, so they're going to stay back. Now, what that also means is they're going to play around to the flanks, and in this case, Toronto is happy to do that because they have Nicola Small and Barnett who can do that. Now, when you make your opposition play out to the flanks, you better be prepared for your, the four in the midfield. After the two in the top, in the forward line, you have the four in the midfield. You be prepared with that four in the midfield flanks to be running up and down, because you're making your opposition play to the flanks, and they're going to do it. And if you're not ready to track back and forth and make sure that flank play is neutralized, you're in trouble. And that's what Halifax didn't do. They didn't have Marika Guay and Sarah Miller playing exactly to plan, and it would leave too much space on the flanks for Small or Colby Barnett, and this helped Toronto create a number of chances through the wings and also runs behind that back line. And now eventually they did some switches on that wings. Sarah Miller and Mariko Guay switched flanks. They tried to see what they can do, but it didn't really help all first half. Actually, the goal also comes that way. Toronto spreads the midfield wide. The ball goes to the right-hand side wing. And guess who? Nicola Small is there, who is able to beat a couple of defenders, make a run to the touchline, and then put a ball in across into the 6-yard box. And I think to some extent, Halifax didn't defend well. They left Colby Barnett completely unmarked, and she's able to just slot into the near corner and just give no chance for McLeod to do anything with it. So that's where the goal comes from, and not just the goal, but the whole first half is a story of Halifax trying to do the 4-4-2, but not implementing correctly on the four in the midfield, especially on the flanks, and completely getting outplayed in that area. Second half, they do change a little bit, so and especially on the flanks, they change because Sarah Miller is taken out and Sid Kennedy is put back in. But now Halifax is sitting too deep again. That's the thing with 4-4-2. If you don't do it right, you're often caught in transition. You're often sitting way too deep, and if you have the possession, you're caught way far away, or way far too deep. Or if you don't have the possession, you're caught way far up the field and you're leaving space behind. So if you don't get it right, it can be a problem in both sides. And Toronto, on the other side, couldn't really take advantage of this, to be honest. And that had to do with the fact that Nicola Small was not really there on that right-hand side flank where she could have taken advantage of it. She was instead way too deep often. She was playing in defense sometimes, helping out the defense, the three in the defense. And I think instead of playing Pickett, Victoria Pickett, sometimes high up in the forward line, I think they should send Nikayla Small up more. The question does arise that what would they do on the right side flank? They could actually bring in either Nyota Katembo there. I haven't seen her in a bit. I don't know what's up with her. She actually was pretty good in the game she played, so I'm not sure what's going on there, but that could be a solution, Play Nyota Katembo in place of maybe a Shuri and then send up Nikayla Small where she really belongs, where she really shines. I mean, she belongs everywhere, to be honest. She's a workhorse, but especially in that right side wing at the top. Anyways, the other big change I would say, or the big difference that happened in the second half was because of the changes that they made, Tides went from a 4-4-2 to 4-2-3-1. And that one of the key changes there was they brought in Cristabel Oduro in place of Millie Clegg. And what that did was, when you have a 4-2-3-1, right? So Oduro was up top by herself, and the rest of the midfielders kind of play behind her. What that does is, when you have 4-2-3-1 instead of a 4-4-2, and your opposition is playing three at the back, the three at the back are not playing against two forward line players, right? They just have one forward to deal with. So what that does is it sucks the other two defenders a little bit further forward from their own goal. And that can create spaces behind them, which the flank players can, exploit. And that's what kept happening, especially with Croy Soto of Toronto. She kept getting pulled forward into the midfield from the defensive line. And then that created a lot of space for Daphne Blouin of Halifax Tides to kind of exploit behind the defensive line of Toronto. And that gave a lot of scope to work with for the Tides, and it did leave some possibility for counters for both teams, so it became a little bit more fun. But otherwise, the game didn't really change too much and kind of meandered towards a finish. I would say though, for Halifax, they should have played that 4-2-3-1 from the beginning. They kind of did that last game too, so I don't know why they did not do it this game. With that 4-2-3-1, they could have pulled the Toronto defense a little bit further up, created some more spaces, and it would have worked a lot more in their favor. Meanwhile, for Toronto, the goal came because of Small. More of their chances will come because of Small. They need to figure out where Small plays, because otherwise it really is as an imbalance. When you play Small too far deep into your own half, you're really not helping yourself create enough chances. She has a great work rate, but I mean, you need your best players going up and helping you create chances. So yeah, good work by Toronto getting that win. Halifax it's a case of almost there. It's been like that for the last 2 weeks. I really hope that they are able to come up with that finishing product. Table doesn't reflect it, but I'm very hopeful for them that they will eventually catch up. So with that, let's move on to the next game. All right, so let's talk about the last game of the week, which was Calgary Wild playing Montreal Roses. And to some, it might seem like the most surprising game of the week because Montreal Roses, after all, were unbeaten and top of the table. And so they get their first defeat against the Wild. So might be thinking that Wild did something uniquely Wild, kind of to topple the table toppers. But it wasn't really. Calgary Wild kind of did the same thing that they did last week when they drew 0-0 against Ottawa Rapid, which was play a 4-2-3-1 formation, but instead of having that double pivot all the time, they would send Maggie Doherty-Howard up when they were in attack. So Doherty-Howard would join the attacking midfield, leaving just Jacqueline Savitsky as a single pivot, and put more numbers into that midfield to kind of outnumber the opposition defensive midfield. The difference was, or the challenge they had with that was they couldn't find a good number 10 who could play alongside Maggie Dougherty Howard in that attacking midfield and outnumber the opposition defensive midfield. They've tried many folks. They've tried Tegan Stewart. They've tried Madison Wilson, and none of them really were effective, to say the least. Right, and that was changed here with Janai Robertson coming in. I think she got her first start of the season, and man, she fit in so smoothly into that number 10 role and was able to connect with Doherty Howard really well, and that made a difference, a huge difference, and we'll get to that. The other change Calgary Wild made was Danielle Steer, who came in the middle of that forward line, which is, number 9, kind of number 9 position in the place of Sarah Griffith, and Christy Gray came in on the left wing of the forward line in place of Collie Johnson. And they brought in some much-needed aggressiveness, I think, as well as some good positional understanding. They were able to track back often when needed. Now, while the Calgary Wild tactical formation played a big role in the result, I think a bigger role was played by Montreal's strange tactical change. I don't know why they made this change. They were usually play 4-3-3, but in this game they decided to go with a 4-4-2. What that means is when you have a 4-4-2 instead of a 4-3-3, you pull back at least one of your forward players back, right? So in this case, Latifa Abdu, who, by the way, is I think the star of the league at this point, the way she scores goals, the way she is able to run into the opposition box, you wouldn't think that she would be playing, further back, but that's what Montreal had her do. She was brought back into the 4 midfield of Montreal, so that meant that she had more defensive responsibilities. She had to track back a lot more, and I don't think that's part of her natural game. And so it made it really hard for Abdu to be effective in transitions, and in a sense, that left no flank play for Montreal. So like when, let's say when they had the ball, they would have Abdu try to go up and maybe have Ali Hess step into the attacking mid and help Abdu and the rest of the midfielders out. But when they lost the ball, for example, high up the pitch, it's really hard for Abdu to organically track back because that's not her natural aptitude. So a lot of the times, the left back would have to also help or support the left back, and the right back also would try to support the attack and leave a lot of space open in the Montreal defense behind their lines. And that's what happened a lot of times when Sarita Thurton for Calgary would find wide open spaces behind the Montreal defense because Montreal were getting caught in transition. And this is really what ended up happening. Montreal didn't have any attack on the flanks. Bilbo and Hess were neutralized in the midfield, so most of their major lines of attack that they usually use had dried up. And so Montreal ended up with barely any chances. And when I say that, I mean they had 0 shots on target all game. And that's crazy for the team that leads the league in the number of goals scored and leads the league in the number of points, obviously. So part of it was Calgary playing a really compressed midfield and a lot of numbers in that central part of the field, which neutralizes Bilbo and Hess. But also the part of it was Montreal playing strangely a 4-4-2, a much more defensive approach than a 4-3-3, and a little bit more attacking. So in the second half, the formations were still almost the same. It was neutralizing each other. The difference really was the subs that came in, and it kind of changed the structure a little bit in the sense that it made one of the flanks a lot more chaotic, especially the right side of Calgary, which is the left side of Montreal. By that I mean Sarita Thurton was taken out, Grace Doherty was taken out, and for Montreal, Laura Schenk was taken out, and all 3 were on that same flank, which is the right side of the Calgary attack. Now, what this meant was that side of the field was where most of the play was happening. Most of the play was trying to be won. One of those kinds of plays is what led to the goal. Now, before I get to the goal, I also have to remark about the second half performance of Charlotte Bilbao. And this might actually be the bigger difference between the two teams at the end of the day, which was Charlotte Bilbao had a terrible second half. I mean, for how good she is, for how important she is for Montreal, I don't know what happened to her after maybe like the 70th minute or so. She was barely doing anything. She couldn't track back. She wouldn't get to the ball fast enough. She was almost at certain stretches of the game was walking. So I don't know really what was the reason, but this played a big role in the goal. In the build-up to the goal, the right side of that Calgary attack, as I had mentioned, was being trying to be won by both sides, and it ended up with Calgary around the central line area. Sarah Griffith, who by now had come into the game in place of Danielle Stier, even though she plays center forward, she found herself on that right-hand side flank, got the ball, carries it up the flank, and she has support with Janiyah Robertson and Doherty Howard. As I mentioned, they were the two who were helping in that attacking mid position. So Janiyah Robertson and Doherty Howard were both pushing up. And the difference was Charlotte Bilbao wasn't tracking them. She wasn't tracking back, and this leaves a wide open space for Robertson in the middle. Thankfully for Calgary, Griffith looks up, looks across, sees Robertson wide open, crosses the ball in. Robertson takes a good amount of time, looks up, finds her spot, takes a first-time curling shot, and it goes in off the right post. Beautiful goal. Really good shot by Robertson and well-deserved for her efforts, I have to say. Full credit to her for not just the goal, but the whole game. She has given Calgary a big hope in that number 10 position. But if I'm a Montreal fan, I would be very worried about that stretch of play for Charlotte Bilbao. I mean, it shows the difference it makes when Bilbao is not on her game, how much of an effect it has on Montreal and Montreal's game as well. So something to note for Montreal going forward. I guess in the last two games, it's become clear how much they are dependent on Bilbao and Hess for their vision, for their through passes, and how much they're dependent on Abdu being a lot more further up and the flanks, the way they use it. So I guess teams are starting to figure it out, and that's what makes this league fun now, because there are no more unbeaten teams. There's a lot more chaos in the middle of the table. Calgary Wild now is up. Rapid has found its way all the way up to the second position. And yeah, it's a lot more in flux. So, and that's what you would like to see. You want to see more, parity in action, which keeps everyone interested. So, let's hope it continues. Let's hope teams try to outfox each other this way, and there's no team left behind. So, with that, let's move on to the next topic, which is prediction time. And it's that time of the show where we take all of our bad takes and use it to make some even worse predictions. So let's start. So we have 4 games this week. First time that's happened. So let's see. The first game is Vancouver versus Halifax. Vancouver's at home. And my bet is Quinn and Stanton are starting. There's no two ways about that. They really need them back, though I don't think it's still enough to fix their forward line issues, but at least in midfield, they need them back. If Halifax, though, were to return to their 4-2-3-1 setup, which I really think they should. I mean, it worked really well for them the week prior, and so if they do go back to that, this could be a really close one. So I'm going to predict it's going to be a 1-1. I am a little bit inclined to say Halifax 2-1, though Vancouver's at home, so I'm staying with 1-1 for a tie. So the second game, Montreal versus Toronto at Stade Montréal. Montreal's back at home. This is the game of the week, I would say. Toronto is on a roll. They just need to fine-tune some, positional issues in midfield. Whereas Montreal needs to get back to their winning ways. They really badly need it, and they want to get that midfield control back. So if they can play that 4-3-3 well And if they can get that midfield control from Bilbao and Hess, as they usually do, they can really exploit the gap between Toronto's midfield and defenders. And this could be a real test for the Toronto back three if Montreal play their 4-3-3 really well. So we'll see. Meanwhile, it can also be a big test for Montreal's midfield if Toronto play their 5 midfield setup really well. So it's going to be a very fun game to watch. I'll be at the game, by the way. Woo, woo, woo. Let's go. Allez Roses, I guess. But yeah, my prediction is 2-1 to Montreal. So I guess there's a little bit of bias here. Nobody saw that, though. Never mind. Let's move on. Vancouver versus Calgary. Vancouver, this is their second game back-to-back in literally 4 days. So this is going to be a big problem with their depth. I don't know, man. With Calgary finding their footing, this could be a mismatch with Calgary's experienced and set midfield against Toronto's inexperienced and potentially rotating midfield. I worry for Vancouver here. It's a bad spot for them. I think Calgary is going to be 2-0. They're going to take this, and it's not going to look good for Vancouver. Same thing with the next one, Ottawa versus Montreal. Montreal now has it's their turn to get tested with their depth because they're playing their second game in 4 days, this time away to Ottawa. Not too far, but still away. It's going to be a hard call to make because it depends on how Montreal adjusts to the rotation. It's going to be the first time we're going to see them rotate this drastically. With Ottawa coming off of a full rest week and the solid, stable lineup that they have now, yeah, I worry a little bit for Montreal here. I say Ottawa win this 2-1. And that's it. That's all the games this week. We are a little spoiled with this weekend's games because we're going to have a off week the weekend after for international break. So might as well take it when we get it. And as always, have a great weekend. Have so much fun at the games. We're going to have 4 of them, so enjoy them. And until I see you next week, be good, be kind, and be you.